If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the creepiest shit you've ever seen at night? I was dog sitting 2 boxers last weekend. I knew they tend to walk on their hind legs, but I've never encountered one doing it. I woke up at about 2:30 to turn the TV off and rolled over to a silent dog perched on her hind legs. Not only was it alarming to see her standing there, upright, but it was freaking dark and her outline looked so similar to the classic, green alien. She was also slouched a little with her head to the side, so it just looked even more weird. Once I realized it was the dog, everything was fine, but for about 10 seconds while I processed what I was seeing, I couldn't even think about anything other than how scared I was. A few buddies and myself used to be into ghost hunting in high school. There was this creepy 19th century graveyard in my town, sort of tucked back into the woods off of a desolate road, that we'd sometimes go to at night for shits and gigs. I had one of those talk boys from Home Alone, so I'd take that and we would ask the spirits questions to try to excite some EVPs or whatever. Really, we were just fucking bored. So one night around midnight we decided to go. It had recently rained and was still drizzling a little bit, so the atmosphere was pretty spooky. As we're walking up, sort of laughing and joking to ourselves, one of my buddies stops dead in his tracks and is just staring towards the center of the graveyard where there is a small, dim street lamp. Shit you not, faintly illuminated by the light, there is a group of 5 or 6 people dressed in head to toe in black, hooded robes sitting Indian style in a circular formation. We're out of earshot, so we can't really hear if there's any chanting or dialogue, but we just kind of sit and watch for a second. Suddenly we see another one emerge from the woods holding a lantern, slowly walking towards the group. This sort of did it for us, so we turned and legged it out of there. We still have no idea if that was a cult or what, but it scared the shit out of us. Brakes went out on my car way out in the boonies, probably 10 miles from the nearest town and a few to the nearest house. I went into a ditch where I split my head open pretty good on the side window and broke my arm and a few ribs. So, I'm in pain, it's pretty hard to breathe, and as it's circa 1997 I didn't have a cell. Nothing to do but start walking. It was a moonless, cloudy night. In other words, pitch, and I mean pitch black. I could only tell I was still on the road by the sound my feet made on the concrete. Couldn't see my hand in front of me. So here I am in the middle of nowhere, bleeding out of my head from a gash that went on to need 35 stitches, broken arm, broken ribs, can't see my hand in front of me, and what do I hear behind me? The warbling call of a coyote. Then another, and another. Next thing I know there must be 20 of them and they sound like they're in a damn blood frenzy. Now under normal circumstances I could probably take a few coyotes. But I can barely lift my broken left arm, and even moving my right arm makes my ribs light on fire. So I realize I am in a very serious amount of trouble. Nothing for it but to keep walking. They're close now, can't be more than 100 yards. Finally I see the light of a house in the distance. I want to run, but I don't. I maintain pace, walk up to this place, and with no amount of manliness in my voice I proceed to bang very loudly on their door and beg for them to let me in. Finally some old man answers the door, pulls his gun on me and asks what I'm doing banging on his door at 2 in the morning. I got in a car crash and there are coyotes after me, please let me in so I can call for help. Guy grabs and shines a mag light back the way I had come, and sure as shit, had to be 25 to 30 coyotes. Seriously, if that house was another mile away, or if lost consciousness in the crash or on the road, I'd have been eaten. My husband and I were on a road trip, coming back to Louisiana from Iowa. We would drive in 4-hour shifts while the other person slept in the back of the car. It was about 3 a.m. and he woke me up to start my shift. I looked around and didn't see another car in sight or even a street light or building. He had taken an alternate route that he thought would be faster. Finally we come across a small, local gas station with a single light on. It was closed and our car was the only one there. We pull over, and as I'm getting ready to open the car door so we can switch places, my husband tells me to hold on. I look up and from behind the back of the gas station a man wearing rags was shambling towards us quickly. Not quite running, which made it even scarier in a zombie-esque way. I told my husband to hurry and drive away. He was intrigued though. He just stared ahead as the guy got closer and closer. I started freaking out and screaming for him to go until he did. As he drove away I looked behind us until the gas station disappeared. As far as I could see the man followed the car at the same odd pace he was walking at until I could no longer see him. Gives me the chills big time. When I was pretty young, there was a tapping at the window in the bedroom that I shared with my younger sister. We were both scared, and I was telling her that it was just branches touching the window or something. She made me get up and look, and when I opened the curtains there was a man standing there, tapping on the window and looking in. It turned out to be my sister's father, who had gotten drunk and driven 20 miles to our house, where he intended to tap on our mother's window. He was still in love with her, but got confused because he was drunk. For a long time after that we were both afraid to go to bed at night because we thought there would be someone in our room or outside the window. I work on a dairy, and just the other night I had to clean the milk barn by myself. No one else was on the property, and as I was cleaning I kept seeing something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like a little white face about knee height that was just staring at me. I saw the face near corners in the barn, and when I'd turned there was nothing there, as if what I saw had just ducked around the corner. Then when I went out to open the gate to the corral, I heard someone yell at me, even though everyone else was gone. A 21-year-old man called home for my dad to come help me finish up and calm down, but my parents were out that night and no one answered. I finished and went home, then had to sit there all by myself until they got back. I remember back when I was in university I was watching zombie movies one night. It was about 3 a.m. and I went to get something to drink from the kitchen, and there was this person standing in the middle of the road at the end of the street. They were far enough away that I couldn't make out anything about them, just a shadowy figure. I watched them for about 15 minutes and they didn't really move other than some swaying back and forth. I finally decided my imagination was getting the best of me and decided to watch another movie. After the movie I went to the kitchen window again, and sure enough the figure was still there. This time a car drove by and the figure shuffled a few steps after it, then stopped. Whoever it was gone when I woke up, but it creeped me out enough that I still remember it 10 years later. I've seen tons of creepy shit, I don't know which story to share. But I'll start with this one. I was in my first semester of college and I was in a relationship with one of my best friends from high school. I don't ever recommend. I used to spend the night over his house a lot, which his mom was not too fond of, but I did anyways. Let's call him Manny. Well, one night I'm at his house, and he wakes me up around 4 in the morning. I'm not very happy, as I hate being woken up, but he asked me to lay down on his sofa on the other side of the room so his mom wouldn't see me if she opened the door. She leaves for work at about 4:30 a.m. I immediately move to the sofa and fall back asleep, but wake up not too long afterwards because it was so damn uncomfortable. I try to reach for my phone so I can use the flashlight to get around and find my glasses, but it's dark and I can't find them. I look at the alarm clock on the desk and it's about 5:30 in the morning. Now this is when things get weird. I look up and see my boyfriend at the time laying awake on the bed. He was laying on his back and playing with his phone. Even though it was dark, I could tell because he had his glasses on and the light from his phone was shining on his face and reflecting off his glasses. "Manny, can I come back to the bed now?" He leans up a little, looks at me, lays back down and back at his phone without saying a word. "Manny, this is not comfortable, can you check if your mom left?" He leans up a little, looks at me, lays back down and back at his phone without saying a word. "Manny, can you please get up?" He leans up a little and repeats the same exact thing. "When I find my glasses, I'm going to kick your ass." I try to search for where I might have kicked my phone and glasses for a few minutes and have no use. So, I look back up to ask my boyfriend to help me. "Manny, can you?" I froze. When I look back up, there is no one there. I try not to panic a lot, and frantically look for my glasses and phone with no use. I sat by the closet and started to shrivel. My boyfriend comes in a few minutes later and asks me why I was by the closet. He turns on the lights and immediately asks me what's wrong when he saw my face. "Manny, you were just in here a few minutes ago, right?" He tells me no, he's been in the kitchen talking and having breakfast with his mom for the past hour. I beg him to not be joking, this is serious, and that he knows I don't like this kind of shit. After I explained to him what happened, he said I wish I could say I was joking, but I swear I was never in here. That afternoon he told me about other creepy stuff that happened in his room. Never spent the night there again. Back in the mid-80s I was camping with my parents and a friend next to the Columbia River in Oregon. It was at one of those Koa-type places my mom liked, but pleasant enough given that it wasn't overly crowded while we were there. My friend and I slept in a tent pitched next to the trailer and were up really late one night playing Risk and drinking copious amounts of soda. Both of us had to go to the bathroom and decided to go up to the camp's facilities instead of waking my parents by using the trailer toilet. Everyone else in the camp was fast asleep, but it was really noisy out due to all the frogs and crickets. On the walk up neither of were talking, and about halfway there the hair on the back of my neck started to stand up and I got this weird chilled sensation. My friend stopped and put his arm out to stop me and put his finger to his lips in a gesture to keep quiet. That's when I realized that there was no noise, anywhere. No frogs, no crickets. Nothing. I had this urge to bolt back to the tent, but it wasn't strong enough to actually get me moving. I looked over to my friend and he was staring up at the sky. I looked up too and didn't realize what I was seeing until the stars started appearing off to my left, slowing appearing from left to right. It was as if something gigantic was in the sky, blotting out the stars, but with the way the stars were reappearing it must have had a straight trailing edge. Imagine yourself holding up a big piece of cardboard above your head at night, moving it from left to right. It felt like that. No lights though, no color, no noise, only the sensation of nothingness slowly moving off to our right. I don't know how long we watched, but by the time the stars had all reappeared up to the tops of the trees over by the river, the frogs and crickets had started to make noise again. We talked about what we thought it was before falling asleep and decided to keep quiet about it the next day in hopes of hearing someone else in camp talking about it, but heard nothing. We stayed there for a couple more days after that, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. BTW, the weather while we were there was beautiful with no clouds or fog. It still creeps me out to this day, but at the same time fascinates me as to what it might have been. I've seen shadow people, glimpses in the corner of my eye, and heard noises coming from other rooms, but what I experienced in the summer of 2013 just isn't normal. What happened was, I was night fishing off the shoreline of a narrow rocky pier, with two of my cousins. We were going to do an all-nighter and go home in the morning time. Everything was normal, we cast out the lines and rebait after every 20 or so minutes. We've gotten bites on the line and big strikes, but nothing gets hooked. This kept going on till 1 a.m., and I will explain every moment. I don't believe in anything like ghost or paranormal stuff, but I now believe in something else. I had a pole set out on the point of the rock pier and the bell started ringing off. On this night it was pitch black, and our only source of light was 2 flashlights and 1 lantern. My older cousin was sleeping at the base of the rock pier with a lantern and a flashlight. My younger cousin goes to rebait his other poles and I lend him my flashlight to use. He checks his lines and they're both cut, so he goes back to set up his jig. I hear the bell go off on one of the poles at the end of the rock pier, so I book it to there jumping on every rock. I make it to there, then the bell suddenly stops. I wait to see if it's still on the line, but nothing. I reel in the line, and see that my bait is still there, but my lead line was cut. I look at it closely through the pure darkness and it looks like a clean cut off, and I'm confused. This is where the fucked up shit happens. I grab my pole and go to walk back, but I get an eerie feeling on my face and chest, and stop with my back to the ocean while I'm facing land. This voice, a voice that sounded like an old lady, mixed with a young girl, that has a dry throat, calls to me. It's a soft noise, it sounded familiar to my name, and a lot of people don't say my name right, and it sounded like my name. I try to walk forward and it hits me with a loader, more mono screech yelling what seems to be my name. I am paralyzed, my whole body feels weird like something is wrapped around me, and I see something emerge out the right side of the rock pier. I can't see through the darkness, but it was a human-like figure, with glowing yellow eyes. I heard the big splashes as it came out of the water. Right now I cycle through what I have done in my life, and that I'm going to die here, and it will be another story of getting swept away to the sea. But I yell my loudest for my younger cousin, and I'm bawling in tears screaming for him. I hear a huge splash, and then I feel like I've been released from whatever paralyzed me. That creature was gone, and I went back to grab my poles in the morning time. Never again have I gone there, and I don't think I would ever want to experience that again. Some local fisherman I've spoken with said it was a mermaid, bringing me into the ocean. I still don't know. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm not a firm believer in ghosts, but like the thought and thrill of ghost hunting. While I was in high school, me and a buddy heard a story about a haunted road about 45 minutes west called the Oxford Lights. Story goes, a young girl was forbidden to see her boyfriend. So the only way they would see each other is, she would sneak out with the car, go to the top of the highest hill on her road, and flash her lights 3 times. Then he would come meet her. One night her and her father get into an argument. Finding out they were together, she leaves. Her boyfriend is still on his motorcycle, head to his home when she gets to the top of the hill and flashes. He sees the signal, makes a U-turn, and starts to head back. Now, the road is very long and full of hills. He goes up and down 3 and gets hit by a car and dies. She finds the wreck and goes home to hang herself. I'm sure there are tons of different stories for this, but this is just what we heard. You are supposed to go to her house. Apparently her house is the last house on the street. It is abandoned. Touch the barn, go to the highest hill, turn off your car, flash your lights 3 times and wait. What you see next isn't what scared me, that comes shortly. When you flash your lights, way off in the distance, you see a single red tail light. As if it's a motorcycle. You watch it drive away from you, going up and down hills, make a U-turn, and head towards you. Up a hill, down a hill, up an hill, down a hill. Doesn't come back up. We did this 3 times. Worked every time. My buddy goes to start the car. Won't start. I chuckled. Of course it won't start. We're in the middle of nowhere ghost hunting and your car won't start. So he waits a few before trying again. While I'm sitting there thinking of reasons I can call bullshit on this ghost, I look to my right. And there is the shadow of a man standing in his yard, head pointed slightly down about 50 feet from the car. I pointed out to my buddy. As most people would agree, time to bounce. He goes to start, the car is trying to turn. I look over, he's moved about 15 feet closer. Still standing now with his back to me. I look at my buddy and tell him we're never taking his car again. Anywhere. And I look back, Slender Man is gone, to my knowledge. And at that moment his car started and he floored it. He still owes me a pair of pants after shitting myself. I used to work for a newspaper company, and I was kind of the paper boy, except I had to deliver the papers by 4 a.m., so I would usually go outside at 2 a.m.-ish, and start delivering. I saw a lot of random shit happen at that time of the night in my neighborhood. The weirdest one of all was when I saw a cat cross the street with a dead pigeon in its mouth. Of course I thought nothing of it, since it is a cat and they kill birds. Maybe 2 minutes later, when I was at the end of that street, coming back in the direction of the cat, I saw 3 cats and the one with the dove, sitting there. All in a circle around the dove, not a single cat was moving. I found that pretty weird, so when I walked along the sidewalk maybe 6 meters away, I hear the sound coming from an empty house's yard. I look over and out comes this big Great Dane, the dog breed, walking fairly relaxed. He goes to the cats, sits with them and just stares at the dove. Right about then I decided to get away, since 5 animals staring at a bird is a bit weird. Oh shit. I've actually got a story. Back in 1995, I moved into an apartment with another girl. Before we moved in, the landlord disclosed to us that someone had broken in and raped one of the previous tenants. She had seriously amped up security before she rented it to us, and the price was really good, so we moved in. Nothing really weird happened for the first few months we lived there. It was, at the time, kind of a sketchy neighborhood, but not so bad. Mostly youngish college students and old people who had lived there forever. There were quite a few bars/cafes nearby, and some of our friends lived down the street, so we felt pretty safe. Until the day when I went out on the porch to have a smoke and discovered that my roommate's window screen had been cut. We were freaked out, but we told our landlady and she put up new screens, and something else having to do with the alarm system/windows. Glass break sensors, I think. A few nights later, I was going to bed around 10. I went to go pull down my window shade and happened to glance into the yard. Not 20 feet from my window was a dude in his 20s, wearing dark clothes, staring into my window. He grinned in a really creepy way when he saw that I had noticed him, and started moving toward the window. I noped out of there and went screaming into the living room where my housemate and her BF were watching a movie. I could hear some scratching noises coming from my room when I was running out, but once I started screaming they stopped. We called the cops and they came and found footprints in the grass and marks from a tool on my window frame. It freaked my shit out. The landlady installed window bars, but I just never felt safe there after that. Ended up moving out a few months later. Just thinking about it, 20 years later, makes me shiver. It was definitely the creepiest thing that's happened to me. Gah. Now I don't want to walk outside in the dark ever again. About 2 years ago I got a message on my phone from a high school friend I hadn't run with in almost 30 years. He said he would be in town in about a month, just in time for the beginning of deer season, and was looking to go hunting. I called him back and we caught up for a few minuets and I gave him my address. He showed up around noon a few days before we planned to head out, so we talked of old times and the toll the years had taken on us. Before we knew it we were loading up the Jeep, filling up on gas on our way out of town. Uneventfully we arrived on my 200-acre plot. I did a quick walk around of the Jeep before we ventured out on the trail to my hunting positions, checked the tire pressure, and soon we were in the blind, loaded and waiting. Over the course of 4 days and nights sleeping under the stars, sitting in the blind and tracking, we managed a 6 pints buck and a larger doe. With the sun setting, the recently shot doe tied to my roof rack and the buck, which had been field stripped, packed with dry ice in the cooler, we were off. Creepy starts here. I was taking the trail out slow due to the darkness and recent rain, and soon it became apparent that we must have taken an incorrect turn, as the ride-in had taken about an hour and we were going on 4. So I stopped on a relatively dry piece of earth and pulled out my handheld GPS and map. After 10 minuets of the GPS being unable to find a lock, I handed it off to Jeff and pulled out the compass, placed it on the dash and continued on towards what I could only assume was out. After heading the same direction, taking what looked like trails, we were exhausted, The GPS was dead and I was running low on gas. We laid back the seats as far as we could with the gear in the back and tried to sleep. I woke up to a loud crack and was faced with a man wearing tattered jeans and a t-shirt kneeling on my hood in a crack running the length of the windshield. With a subhuman howl he swung again and put a spider crack in the passenger side of the glass. Scared out of my mind, I twisted the keys in the ignition and quickly realized I had left it in gear as we lurched forward. Without taking my fingers off the starter, I slammed my foot into the clutch, and as soon as the engine roared to life, I put my foot to the floor and let the clutch out in an attempt to throw this man off my vehicle. Fortunately, I was successful and reached for my overhead so I could see where I was going and narrowly avoided hitting another similarly dressed man. I heard the distinctive crack of a large caliber firearm, which only made me attempt to go faster. Soon I was pushing 25 miles per hour on a relatively technical trail, skipping my smash plates off of trees and taking out smaller ones with my stinger and large steel front bumper. Almost on cue, I saw the glow of a street lamp and heard my rear window shatter, followed instantly by the crack of a gun. I let nothing get in between me and this escape. I pulled onto what amounted to a small 2-lane paved path, grabbing gears, not caring that I was still locked in 4WD. I hit around 60 miles per hour with every part of my Jeep screaming. I spotted a gas station. I pulled in and got her back in 2WD, leaned against my Jeep and began to fill it up, assuming I had left the crazies far behind. I was wrong. The pump clicked off and I walked inside to pay and find out where I was to call the police. I made eye contact with the cashier, who was wearing a black t-shirt and ripped up jeans. He said, "You still aren't welcome here." I turned and was back in my Jeep before I even realized what I was doing and left 11s across that parking lot, something I didn't even know a Jeep could do. I didn't know where I was or where I was going, but that didn't matter in the least. We needed to get out. I found the highway we had coming on, Highway 57, and settled in, listening to the wind howl through the shattered rear window. That was when I remembered I wasn't alone in the car. Jeff was still fully reclined in the passenger seat. I shook him to wake him up, but I realized his eyes were open. He just shook his head and wouldn't speak to me. I drove past the house and straight into town as the sun was peaking the horizon and pulled into the local Leo station. I went inside and calmly requested to speak to an officer. After a few minuets, Officer Harris walked out to meet me. We shook hands and I asked him to follow me out as I recounted my tale of the previous night. I almost don't think he believed me until he saw the shattered rear window and the bullet hole in the tailgate. He opened the tailgate and found the bullet had gone into our meat cooler. Soon we had almost a whole bullet. He took my report, the bullet and a few pictures, and offered Jeff medical assistance. He said something I will never forget. "They aren't real, they follow me everywhere. They hate me, they hate the real world." I didn't say anything the whole ride home, and almost as soon as we were back he pulled his bags from my Jeep, and without so much as a goodbye, he left. I was 16. Walking home from my Chinese GF's house after a night of making cookies. It's like 5 a.m. in a school night/day. I see a guy walk onto his lawn to grab the morning paper. Sprinklers are on. As I'm getting closer, I notice that this guy isn't wearing any clothes. Being the awkward kid I was, I crossed the street to the other side of the block. This was in a suburb, so I can give this guy some space. All of a sudden, naked guy runs through the sprinklers with newspaper in hand. I try not to stare, cause hey, it's his sprinkler and he can do anything he wants with it. I try to walk as briskly as I could until I am squarely in front of his lawn on the other side of the road. It is this moment when he realizes that he has a spectator. There's an awkward split second where we lock eyes, and his face turns beet red. He tries to say something, but only blubbers some incoherent form of English. Before I get a chance to utter a single word to diffuse the situation, he charges at me. Yes, this naked, cold, wet man armed with a soggy copy of the NY Times is running at me, planning to do God knows what. Hurtling towards me, in all his saggy ball and man-titty glory. I follow my instincts and run, as my house is only 5 to 6 blocks from where I am. But I realize that once I make it home, this guy will know where my house is. Plus, I don't want to wake my parents up after I snuck out to make cookies. My house is 2 blocks from an elementary school, so I run there. As soon as I get onto the school grounds, I whip around and confront my pursuer. "Hey man, you don't want to walk into an elementary school without clothes on." We're both huffing and puffing, sucking for air. He doesn't care. At this point of the story, I should probably mention 2 things. 1, I was in the back entrance of this school, and 2, this school's campus was gigantic for an elementary school. I'm talking like it had room for 3 soccer fields and a baseball diamond. So there I am, running in an open field with a naked crazy man at my heels. I've had enough mental damage at this point, so I start screaming for help out of desperation. I don't even remember what I screamed, but I'm sure it was something along the lines of "Don't you touch me, Wetman." As I get to the front driveway, I see a cop car parked with his lights off. I guess he heard me screaming, cause he immediately gets out and assumes the position needed to tackle the shit out of me. Without missing a beat, I point behind me and say, "Help. Naked guy." I keep my eyes ahead, and I can see the exact moment on the cop's face when he realizes what I'm running from. Like an expression of pure disbelief. Dumbstruck, the cop changes targets and decides to rescue me. I run past the cop and next thing I hear is the sound of two men grunting and a thud. I turn around to see the cop has apprehended saggy balls. He still has his paper. Knowing that the cop will want a statement from me, and remembering that I'm currently sneaking out of my house to make cookies, I sprint home. I stayed home from school that day, and I never walked on that block again to this day. I believe I was about 10 years old, and I had gone to bed like usual, at about 11 p.m. It was a regular night, but something was off. 5 minutes after laying down, I started hearing someone typing on a keyboard, coming from the room next to mine. I thought my father might be working on some stuff on the computer. Internet wasn't as popular as it is now, but I also heard someone watching TV in the living room. So I asked, "Hey Dad, what are you doing?" And he says that he's watching TV. The typing continues. I ask, "And what's Mom doing?" "She's already in bed," he answers. The typing continues. I was one of those kids that didn't like bothering grown-ups with stuff they might think is silly, so I got up and checked the room out myself. When I'm up, the typing suddenly stops. I turn the lights on and there's no one there. Nothing out of the ordinary too. So I go back to bed, believing it was my imagination. 1 minute after laying down, the typing starts again. I was getting creeped out, so this time I called my father. I heard him get up and slowly walk towards my bedroom. When he started walking, the typing stopped. Before he reached my room, I asked him, "Can't you hear a weird noise, like typing?" He says he can't hear a thing. So I tell him he can go back to watching TV. 2 minutes after, the typing starts again. I yell, "Dad, come here quickly so you can hear that noise." He actually rushed to my bedroom this time, so I thought, yes, he's gonna hear it. From what I heard from his footsteps, the moment when he was at a hearing distance from the typing, it stopped. "IT stopped right now. Were you able to hear IT, Dad?" He didn't hear a thing. He asked me if the living room's light or the TV sound was bothering me, and I just said I wanted him to check out the room next to mine. I got up and together we searched the room. The keyboard was quiet as it should be, the room was completely normal. He then sends me to bed, and asks me to try real hard to sleep. I lay down again, and I hear him turning off the TV, the lights, and then I hear his footsteps as he goes towards the bedroom. 2 minutes after that, the typing resumes. I was really freaked out. I shut my bedroom's door. The sound got a bit more muffled. I tried really hard to sleep like my dad said, and I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, everything was quiet. That was the only night I heard it, but I can still remember it like it was yesterday. I really doubt it was my imagination. If it was, I probably would have heard it more times than just that one night. Right? One night when I was young, my parents left me at my grandmother's house for the night. Now, this wasn't just any house. It was built in the 1700s. The buildings my grandparents used for storage had once been slave quarters. The wooden beams on the basement ceiling were blackened from when the basement had been the kitchen where the slaves cooked. Confederate soldiers had camped on the hill next to her house during the Civil War. This house was steeped in history, births, deaths, laughter, wars, slavery, freedom. My grandmother's bedroom was on the first floor, directly above the basement, but she made my bed on the second floor, directly above her room, where I had a perfect view of the hilltop where the soldiers had camped. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. The moonlight was streaming through the window, illuminating the small room. For a moment, confusion overtook me. Where was I? Then I sat up, looked out the window, and was comforted by the familiar landscape of my grandmother's land. Something caught my eye. There was movement on the hilltop. I thought it may be a fox or a deer, as they were common to the area, but then the figure turned in such a way that the moonlight shone onto something on its body, causing a gleam that didn't come from the eyes of an animal. Terrified, I pulled the covers over my head and tried to sleep. The effort was fruitless, and I peeked out of the window again. The figure was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief. Almost immediately, however, the rocking chair in the corner of the room began to slowly but steadily rock back and forth. Looking back now, this may have been due to a breeze that blew in through the window, but I was only about 5 years old at the time, and common sense eluded me. The one thing I still cannot explain, however, was a click I heard as I pulled the cover over my head a second time. I bolted upright, totally alert. The chair had completely stopped moving in the few seconds it had taken me to sit back up. The click had come from somewhere to my right, where the door was. I stared at the closed door, waiting for something to happen, and suddenly the floorboard immediately inside the door creaked. I screamed, and instantly heard my grandmother's footsteps rushing up the stairs. I felt safer every step closer she came, and finally, she was just outside the door. I heard her grasp the knob and then, nothing. I heard the knob jiggle, but the door did not burst open. It was locked. She hadn't locked it. I certainly hadn't locked it. I tiptoed to the door, reached for the lock to let my grandmother in, and heard a familiar click when I turned it to the unlocked position. I lived in Pennsylvania until I was 1 month shy of being 12. I know that exact date because you had to be 12 to hunt in PA and I was looking forward to it. Anyways, we moved to Florida and I get to hunt down here too, so that's okay. I had a few good friends that lived right down the street from me. We lived out in the country. My address was literally 1691 halves_road. Middle of nowhere. So we'd hang out at my buddy's place, or we'd go up this hill for about half a mile until we reached the burn pile and cabin at the top. It really was a basic cabin. Outhouse. No lights. Nothing. We'd hang out there, use it as a fort for Nerf battles, manhunt, CTF, etc. Well, one night my friend invited a few of his friends/cousins up to the cabin so we could roast marshmallows and play manhunt. There were something like 13 of us to start, but the number slowly went down to 10 by nightfall. So we played manhunt 5 versus 5 in the dark. Around 11 p.m. we were in the middle of a game and 2 of my friends had hung back with me because we were the fast ones. We realized that there were only 3 of us left on our team and that we hadn't captured anyone from their team. We tried to make a jailbreak and lost my friend, we'll call him F. It was just myself and another friend that we'll call L. L and I were 100 yards from the other team and they had 3 of our 5 players now in their jail. They began to press our side more and mess with us until one of them told us we were cheating. Elle and I looked at each other unable to figure out why. Our side had about 1/4 of it covered heavily in trees. The other side was about the same, with both wooded areas near the back of the sides. At one point when we were chasing someone off our side I saw Elle and I running in the same direction and someone on the other side of Elle. I quickly cut behind Elle and intended to surprise the other person and nab them on our side. I was probably the fastest person there and I didn't want to be on the team to capture nobody. Once I emerged from behind Elle's trajectory, we were both running, I saw absolutely no one. Nothing, no trees, no scarecrow, absolutely nothing that I could have mistaken for a person. I surmised that there had to be someone from the other team hiding behind our lines waiting for us to cross over and then tag us there. Well, the game ended up dwindling down to us with 2 left and the other side with 4. We capped 1 person and then all parties were exhausted. I asked the other team, mostly Elle's cousins, who was behind the line waiting to cap us. No one claimed responsibility. I figured it was someone trying to mess with us. Back at the cabin we start cooking hot dogs and marshmallows over a fire. We were all 10-13-ish with one person being maybe 15, older cousin, so we were drinking soda and not beer. Note, if this had been beer and I'd been older, I'd just chalk this up to booze. All 10 of us are around the fire when we saw someone coming up the hill. It's hard to see outside in the dark when you've been staring at a fire for a while, but at least 4 of us had seen the person so we figured it was one of the people who left coming back, or someone new. After about half an hour no one came up. We went and looked and found no one. Being the intelligent young kids we were, we decided to investigate further. It's summer, after 12 a.m., and we're out playing with fire and flashlights looking for a mystery person. Yeah, we were not honor students. We went to the path that led down the hill and could clearly see my friend's house in the distance. They left the outside lights on for the dogs, and no one in between. Someone was trying to mess with the group so they ran into the woods and came out directly on top of us, scaring the crap out of everyone. After we all changed our pants and regrouped we headed back to the cabin only to see someone on the very far side of the clearing. There were 3 of us with flashlights, and all of us attempted to illuminate this person, but we were too far away to get a good look. As soon as we lit him/her up he or she disappeared into the woods. Okay then, now a few of us are freaking out. 6 people decide to go down to my friend's house to spend the rest of the night where the axe murderer from hell won't be able to get them. Since they have 6 and the 4 of us who decided to rough it are only 4, the group of 6 got 2 flashlights. I was the only one left with 1. We decided to figure out who this was. Al had an uncle who was only 10 years older than him who we figured was just fing with us. We knew his place was less than a mile from where we were, big extended family, large family plot of land.
L, F, one of L's cousins, gonna call him C,
and myself began to walk across the clearing. Once we were about 40 feet from the edge of the woods, we could hear someone moving around in the brush. Not stomping or anything, but very carefully moving through the fallen sticks and underbrush, trying to make as little noise as possible. We figured it was L's uncle, we'll refer to him as Uncle J. So we split up again and 2 people waited in the clearing, F and L's cousin, and myself and L went into the woods to try to flush out Uncle J. We figured F and C could see okay from the clearing, and to be honest they actually could. L and I eventually were about 50 feet into the woods, further than we thought we'd need to go, when we heard this low rumble noise. This is one of those times when I regretted trying to act macho. L and I kinda looked at each other to make sure it was neither of us rumbling, and basically just stopped dead in our tracks. I shined the flashlight up in the direction of the noise, directly away from the clearing and the fire, and couldn't see anything. There was just nothing there. It was, to this day, one of the most eerie noises I've ever heard. Like a noise a Halloween decoration would have made, but real. We stayed about 50 feet into the woods, never venturing much further in, and searched the general area. Never found anything. After about half an hour of this, it's now past 2 a.m., we heard a noise just at the edge of the clearing and both of us turned around. I had expected it to be F and C coming to figure out what the fuck was taking us so long. But instead, I see one person basically hiding halfway behind a tree looking at us. I've never not wanted to shine my flashlight on something before that moment. If it was dark, I wanted to see what it was. But in the distance, well past the shadowy character, I could see F and C milling about by the fire. I had this awful feeling that there was no way Uncle J was being this creepy. I didn't want to see who it was, and I really just wanted to get away from this person. I mean, the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. L must have seen it too, because he started slowly backing further into the woods. We moved in as wide a circle as we could around this shadowy person and managed to make it back to the clearing. We got back to the cabin and grabbed F and C and began to make our way back to L's place. When we were about 100 yards from the cabin, we heard its door slam and we fucking bolted. When we made it back to L's house near the bottom of the hill, we debated what to do. Should we call 911? Was that a trespasser? Or was that simply a family member messing with us? L went to notify his parents, who we figured would be overjoyed at the premise of being woken up around 3 a.m. by a bunch of sweaty, terrified 11-year-olds. They weren't home. Apparently L's grandfather had a heart attack around 10 p.m. None of us had cell phones as it was 1998, and so no one had been notified except for L's 19-year-old step-cousin. I never really figured out this relationship, TBH, who had drank himself near blackout drunk as soon as the adults left him in charge of all the younger kids up at the cabin. Seriously, he got reamed the next day by basically every adult in attendance. That meant that Uncle J, and basically every other of L's family members who could have been messing with us, were at the local hospital with the patriarch of the family who'd had a mild coronary. At 4 a.m. we knew sleep wasn't an option and began to watch and wait for the shadow guy to show up at the bottom of the hill. Less than 10 minutes later I hear a sound coming from upstairs. Only problem is, there's no upstairs to L's house. There's someone? On the roof. L grabs his pellet gun, cause that's going to be super effective, and we go outside, cause, we're smart and stuff. We shine ever flashlight straight up at the roof and see a completely black silhouette jump off the far side of the house in a mad sprint. The way L's roof was shaped, the part it jumped off of was over 25 high. There was a huge vaulted ceiling in the back room of the house, and the roof was even taller to accommodate for the attic. We watched it run away from the hill and towards the creek, 10 wide maybe 2 deep, and we followed it until we realized how much faster it was than us. Once it reached the edge of the creek, it stopped and looked back at us. This rumble thing came back and it jumped the creek, and we lost it. The next day we told L's parents, and they informed us that the cabin was being torn down. A cow had been killed and dismembered in the fucking cabin early that morning, presumably after we left. It could have been a panther. Cows weren't uncommon on that part of the property, but they tended to avoid the people. It could have been a bear, but fuck, we never went back up that hill at night. No way, no how. Never saw that thing again. Might not seem like much, but to 11-year-old me, I had a new face for fear. I live with my girlfriend in student accommodation, and we share a small room that is mainly just a bed, desk and bathroom. The bathroom sticks out in the room, causing the bed to be tucked behind it in a corner. One night I come in around 3 a.m. and she is fast asleep and the room is silent. She likes to sleep with a small panda bear stuffed animal, and it is usually tucked underneath her arm. Not this night. In the near total darkness of the room, I come around the corner and find myself staring right into the eyes of a soulless dark-eyed corpse sitting bolt upright in bed staring back at me. Very rarely do I feel real terror, but this was one of those moments where everything goes cold, you are rooted to the spot and everything in your brain grinds to a halt. My eyes adjust to the scene and it was just a nest of pillows upright with the body of the panda bear tucked behind them with the face poking out the top, innocent and harmless as anything. In Germany, I was driving back to base one night after leaving a hotel. I decided to take a back road, instead of jumping on the highway directly. I was cruising through this little town and the speed limit was about 30 kilometers per hour. I slowed down and as I approached a church, something caught my eye on one of the pirouettes. As I looked at it, this thing jumped off the pirouette onto the sidewalk, looked my way and ran across the street. It ran on two legs, but was hunched over and low to the ground. As it got to the street, it leapt up onto the 15-foot wall of the cemetery that was across the street. Then, it looked my way again. I hit the gas and didn't look in my rear view the entire way home. I ran upstairs and jumped into bed and pulled the covers over me. I told a buddy about what I saw, and we decided to drive down there that weekend. We got to town and arrived just as church was letting out. We stood there and I was pointing out to my buddy where it happened when one of the priests approached us and asked us if we needed help. We reluctantly explained why we were there and he simply said, "Oh, you have seen it. If you are here now, it meant you no ill will." We asked what it was, and he told us that they don't talk about it. As we started to leave, two older ladies approached us and told us to be careful on what we look for, because we might find it, or it might find us. Me and a buddy were taking a stroll at night on a beach in Florida, Lido Key Beach if it makes a difference, after a big dinner. It was midwinter and the wind was really whipping, had to be in the low 30s with a wind chill. Because of this, the beach was deserted. No one. Moon is out and lighting up the place so well everything is casting shadows. So we're talking and whatnot, when we notice there is a guy walking parallel to us, but right near the surf. Say we're near the sidewalk because no one in their right mind walks near the surf in winter, the water is freezing. I point him out to my bud Jim. Nothing really that odd yet, but this guy is keeping perfect pace with us. He's wearing a hoodie, so we can't see a face. Hands are buried in his pockets. We speed up a little, he speeds up at the exact same time. We slow down, he does too. Okay, whatever. My friend and I are both large guys and this is one dude. Jim tells me this guy might be looking for trouble, so be on your toes. I should mention that this being Florida, the beach is flat. Not even sand dunes. No place to hide. Everything is flat and wide open. It's just us and the mystery dude for as far as we can see. This guy is throwing off some pretty aggressive vibes. He's been following us for 15 minutes, and has now started staring right at us while walking, not even looking where he's going. I turn my head to my buddy and tell him this guy is nothing but trouble. I turn back. He's gone. There is no place this guy could have disappeared to in the 4 seconds I turned my head. No dunes, no lifeguard towers, nothing. It was hundreds of feet to the sidewalk where we were. Only place to go would have been the water, and that was a death sentence considering how cold it was. Me and Jim just stand there in stunned silence looking in every direction in the bright moonlight for the person who we had been watching follow us for the past 20 minutes. It was goddamn creepy as shit. I was about 13 and was camping with a Girl Scout group in these woods over by the local elementary school. We rented cabins and got settled in. While unpacking, a fellow scout seemed really nervous, but I assumed it was her first time camping or maybe she didn't like camping. It was near dusk and the scout leaders gathered us to eat and tell stories, basically to just goof off. The girl that I mentioned was even more nervous, she had barely spoken a word to anyone, so I asked her what the matter was and she looked at me and said with a shaky voice, "There's someone out there." I kind of wrote it off because we were at camp and you'd think of course there would be people around. I just patted her shoulder and went off to grab some snacks. Some time goes by and I'm feeling really drafty, like cold spots and slight breezes running through our cabin, and this was around the time we had to get ready for bed. That girl was bedded next to me and there were two others on the other side, 4 beds placed per corner who were talking amongst themselves, and I was trying to talk to the nervous girl about anything to try to get her to open up a bit. Sometime later the other girls are sleeping and I couldn't. I had this fear of complete silence and darkness together. The nervous girl was breathing kind of heavily, like she was starting to have a panic or anxiety attack, so I turn over to her to ask what's wrong and she says with her voice barely above a whisper, "There's something stalking our cabin." I immediately freak out internally and my eyes dart to the window opposite of me. Nothing. The window behind me. I was so scared, I saw the top of sometimes head only down to the bridge of the nose with fingers resting where the mouth would be. I froze, tears starting to flow out of fear. This thing stared at me for only a few seconds, but it felt like hours and I couldn't scream for out of fear this thing would come get me, or also if the scout leaders came in to investigate, they'd only think I was just imagining things. I knew she saw it too by the look on her colorless face. Years later I looked up if there was any haunting in that area or something that might explain what we saw. Turns out a local farmer killed some girl back in 1993 just outside those woods where she apparently spent a lot of time in. I will never go back. Not only was I scared shitless or suffered nightmares for a while due to it, but it felt evil. I remember the eyes looking merciless and powerful. Gives me goosebumps all over again. Christmas before last, I was laying in bed at my old house with the lights off and the blinds open. It was a beautiful night. The sky was crystal clear, the moon was full, and you could see the stars perfectly. Well, see, one of these stars was kind of funny looking. It would flash from orange to green so quickly it seemed as if it was blinking. At first I figured, it's an airplane. Nope. It wasn't moving in a straight line like an airplane, or hardly at all. So I thought, it's a satellite maybe. But that wasn't it either. It kept wiggling back and forth, like a pendulum, in the same spot, not moving. 10 minutes went by, and it started spitting something. It looked like faint, tiny shooting stars that vanished after a few seconds. To be sure I wasn't high on drugs, I called my friend, who lives in the same county, and sure enough he saw it too. So, we're sitting there wondering exactly what this thing is and what it's shooting into our atmosphere, and then suddenly two others just like it start lighting up and doing the same thing, wiggling and spitting and flashing orange and green. After a few minutes of this, they stop wiggling, stop spitting, and still flashing. They suddenly move off just like airplanes, except quieter and a hell of a lot faster. I don't think it was aliens. I think it was the government. I don't think Mexicans have that kind of technology yet. This will get buried, but whatever. When I was 13 I was at friend's house for a sleepover. Usually when we stayed at his house we slept in the basement, but this time we slept upstairs in his living room, in front of two big sliding glass doors that led to his backyard. As we settled into bed one of my friends looked outside and saw an owl sitting on a patio chair about 3 feet away from the door. Not scary, but really cool. We all looked at it and tried to move closer, but it flew away. Later that night when everyone was asleep I woke up to use the bathroom. I walked to the bathroom and came back and laid back down on the floor by the window. As I'm laying there I see something glowing really far away in his backyard. I watch as it gets closer and closer, moving through the fence, deck, and whatever else like they weren't even there. It gets close to the glass and I see that it's a face, but it's not human. It's like a mask, kind of smiling but with deep round eyes set back in the sockets. It comes up against the glass and looks right in at all of us, almost scanning, stopping for a few seconds on each of us that were sleeping there. It looks at me and I freeze, completely terrified. It does kind of a low breathy rattle, tries the sliding handle, locked, and then pounds on the glass door twice. Everyone else wakes up but it's gone before they see it, and we move to the basement, scared out of our minds. I honestly don't even remember which direction it went, but it was there and then was gone. I tried to describe what I saw but I was pretty shaken up. I didn't sleep that night. I was around 16 to 17 at the time and making my way back home from a day out in summer. It was late, around 11 p.m, I had just got off the last bus that night and the stop was a 5-minute walk from home, so I wasn't too bothered about getting home late at night as I did it often in the summer. As I crossed the quiet road, from some strange reason no street lights were on, which made it really creepy and more dark than usual. I'm walking the usual way I've done many times, but as I turn a corner at one point there is this car driving by, and as I walk past it, it just stops and reverses onto the pavement right next to me. In my head I just thought, am I going to die? Should I run? But I kept my cool and one of the tinted windows went down and some strange guy asked me a description and a name of someone, can't remember as it was a few years ago, but I was creeped out. I said no sorry and I began to walk home again, but what was the creepiest shit about the whole thing? He didn't just drive away. I kept turning round as I became paranoid and he was slowly following me down the road. I didn't know what he wanted, forgot to mention I heard other voices in the car which was worrying, but at one point he went on the pavement again and then I thought fuck it and turned down a longer pathway which cars couldn't access, but at least they couldn't follow me. As I turned around for the last time they were pulled up just staring at me. Arrived home safely and haven't had a strange encounter like this in a while. I was a camp counselor in a remote area. Former campers and counselors had always told me that the camp was haunted, but I don't really believe in that shit. Anyway, it was the last night of the session, and I had a cabin of 9 to 10-year-olds. I woke up in the middle of the night to one of the kids was sitting in my bed. I was a little groggy, but I remember him getting up and walking outside. I was like, shit, I've gotta go after him, and get him back in the cabin. I remember that he opened the door noiselessly, and that was the last I saw of him. As soon as this happened, I woke my co-counselor, and told him that a kid left the cabin, and that I was going after him. I opened the door, and it squeaked like a motherfucker, and then I tripped over a bunch of suitcases that were on the stoop. It was the last day of the session, and we always put the kids' suitcases out there so they would get picked up early in the morning and loaded onto the bus home. I searched all around the cabin and in the surrounding area for about 5 minutes. I then heard my co-counselor calling me in a hoarse whisper, so I ran back to the cabin. He said, I just counted the kids, they're all here. I still don't know what I saw that night. So this happened to my friend, but her story is super disturbing to me to this day, so I'll share. I live in a college town, and my friend is still a student. She was walking home from the library late one night to go back to the sorority house where she was living. She got to the house and realized that she didn't have her key on her, so she started knocking on the door. This guy popped out from the bushes beside the house where he has apparently been lurking, peeping Toms in every college town, you know how it is, and said hi to her and then walked up onto the porch where she was knocking. He started talking to her and she asked him to back off and told him he was trespassing and stuff. Her phone was at the bottom of her backpack and kind of hard to get to. He told her he would leave if she hugged him, and when she refused, obviously, he started to get really upset and calling her a racist, she was white and he was black, for not hugging him. This went on for a couple minutes when she finally just decided to hug him because she didn't really see another option. As soon as she hugged him, he left. Creepy night. Was working graveyard shift, yeah, I know, at the San Jacinto State Park in Idlewild, California. One other park aide was helping me shut down the park for the night, and as we walked around shutting off lights in the office, we chatted about our campfire programs. As I was talking, I noticed a burning feeling at my side. It hurt enough that I grabbed my side, and, as I did so, I noticed that my keys had been inched almost out of my pocket. My keys fell back and I looked up at Matt. I thought he'd be laughing. I just stopped mid-sentence to slap myself. But no. Matt had both arms spread out at his sides, was standing board stiff, and was shaking as if he was being shoved around. I yelled his name, not once but twice, and, finally, he shook his head and looked down at me. His expression must have mirrored mine, an equal measure of terror and embarrassment. I don't know, he said, sheepish, it was as if something just went through me. We set the alarm code and got out of that building swift as ninjas. The next morning we joined the other aides in our routine morning meeting, and the park ranger, Rick, asked how the night had gone. This is when we can impart relevant info about rowdy campers, rattlesnakes that we had to shift away from the park, or any other things that went down during our shift. I glanced at Matt and he was shaking his head and gritting his teeth. Feeling mischievous, I said, yeah, Rick, actually. After relating the night's events, Rick, deadpan, asked if we noted the event in the log. Wait, what? I asked, thinking it was a joke. I said, did you note it in the log? I replied no, still thinking that he was joking. Seriously, 8 people in the room, and the silence that followed, you could have heard a proton settle on a leaf. He then, very, very seriously, advised all of us to read back through the logs. The office and nearby residents had been the site of many strange and disconcerting experiences for years. No problem, Rick. Also, I will be unavailable to work the night shift for the remainder of the summer. Yet we all still had strange experiences during midday. I remember one day when an acorn came pelting through the office and bounced off the wall behind me. Thinking one of the guys was playing a joke, I reached down to fling it back. Nope. It had glue residue on it. It had come out of the plaque on the wall just in front of me. I was kind of glad when the summer ended. Earlier I posted about something that happened to my group of friends and I in 1996. I honestly don't know if it was supernatural. I am somewhat of a skeptic myself. I know that my friend's terror was real. While the events of my other experience was accurate as I remember it, I have to say it was not the scariest thing that has ever happened to me personally. I only say that because I never got a clear answer about what really happened to them. For me, it was a few years earlier in December of 1993. I was living in Aurora, Co. at the time. It was around 9 p.m. and I had just finished my martial arts class and was waiting outside for my mom to pick me up from the school. My martial arts school was in a small shopping center near a well-traveled intersection on the west end of Aurora near Denver. Adjacent to my school in the same parking lot was a Chuck E. Cheese restaurant. It usually closed around the time my class got out, but occasionally some of us would go in and play video games, or get breadsticks while we waited for class to start. This particular evening it wasn't terribly cold. It was mid-December, but the winters in Colorado can be somewhat mild. I was still pumped from class, and I was running around the parking lot with another one of the kids from my class. We were distracted, so we did not see the figure enter Chuck E. Cheese. It was the loud popping noises coming from inside the building that got our attention. Before we could grasp what was happening, a kid came running out of the restaurant with a gun in his hand. He practically ran right into us. The next thing I know, he is pointing it at my face. He just stood there for a minute. It was like time froze. I could not take my eyes off the barrel, and all I could think was that this was not the last thing I wanted to see in the world. After what seemed like a long time, but was probably just a few seconds, I looked past the gun at his face. He was not even looking at me. He looked scared. I could see his finger on the trigger, and I wasn't sure if he was going to pull it, or not. I was frozen and could not have stopped him if he was. Instead, he turned and ran without a word. I watched him go, glued to the ground, amazed that I was still alive. He took off around the side of the building and was gone. My classmate and I just sat on the pavement. Neither of us said anything. Eventually my mom showed up to give me a ride. I'm sure she was curious why I was acting funny, but I could not bring myself to tell her what happened. As far as I know, she still doesn't know to this day. I did not sleep that night. The next morning I heard people in school talking about what happened. The kid's name was Nathan Dunlap. He murdered 4 people I personally knew in cold blood. He critically wounded another. He had ditched the gun in his attempt to escape. That led to his arrest and eventual conviction. He was to be executed earlier this year for that crime, but was given a stay by the governor of Colorado. Having known that he had killed those people, I believe he would have killed us too. I'm not sure what distracted him that night, but I am grateful. My family knows I was there that night. I don't think they know the extent of my involvement. I was never questioned about it, and until now I have never volunteered information about it. I am now, because some things you have to learn to let go of. I was walking in the waterfront park with my girlfriend after seeing a movie. It's in the city, but it was a quiet Wednesday night, so not many people out, and it was around midnight. We're standing there looking at the water holding hands when we notice another figure in this otherwise deserted park. I don't think much of him until I notice he's just kind of pacing back and forth about 200 yards away. Upon looking at him, I notice there's something wrong with his face, but I can't really see. We decide, maybe it's time to walk home, but as we do, we notice he starts walking at us, in our path home. Soon the streetlight hits him and I see he's wearing an odd 80s neon jacket, but he has fully bandaged his entire head and hands and worn sunglasses. Think Invisible Man, but obviously younger and more built. He's holding something in the pocket of his jacket and kind of keeping his hands on it, kind of mulling it around. As we close on each other, I think, well, this is it. We're going to be mugged and or murdered. Just as we close within 15 feet, he starts to tug at his jacket and suddenly lights appear behind us as a pack of 5 cyclists come casually into the scene. Invisible Man immediately breaks off and starts walking off into the grass. Luckily, more people followed on both foot and bike from behind us, and the situation diffused as he wandered off. But I still wonder if we weren't about to get mugged/harmed, or if this was just some unfortunate guy out in the wee hours of the morning. This happened to my dad in about 2002 or so. He used to be the chief mechanic for a small high-powered boat racing team. They often competed in races in Key West, and being a small team, my dad usually drove either the boat or the tool trailer to Florida from Michigan. On one trip, he was driving through Alligator Alley at about 3 a.m. when the truck's engine started to stutter. The lights were flickering on and off and the truck was threatening to stall, so Dad started to look for places to pull off the highway. Unfortunately, there's a crapload of marsh/swamp and a narrow shoulder along I-75 where he was, apparently. While he's looking, the truck loses power completely, and now he's driving a semi-truck with a 40 powerboat on a trailer completely blind. He managed to use the rumble strip to stay on the road and pull off safely, but he's freaked the fuck out by now. Once the truck is stopped, he realizes he's about to piss himself from fear/stress, so he hops out of the truck and walks around to the shoulder to pee. As he's letting loose, he notices some weird lights in the ditch along the road. They keep popping up and then disappearing, or moving and getting closer and closer to him. It takes a bit, but as he's finishing up, he realizes that the lights are eyes, and that there are dozens of alligators less than 10 feet from him in the ditch. He slowly zips up and inches back around the front of the truck, then books it for the cab. He ended up having to wait a few hours surrounded by gators for the other truck to catch up and fix his rig. He swears he's probably never been as scared that he was going to die or be dismembered. I was walking home late one night from a friend's house. It was about an hour-and-a-half long walk, but I was drunk and determined that I didn't want to crash on their couch that smelled like cat pee. I'm maybe 5 minutes away from my house in a nice suburban area when this white, Windowless van drives by. Then it drives by again. And again. I turned into a cul-de-sac because I was getting creeped out. I'm a 6 feet 4 inches dude, but I really wasn't feeling this van. I knew that at the end of the cul-de-sac there was a pathway that led to another street that was closer to my house. The van didn't drive by again. This time, it careened around the corner and was coming straight at me. I ran as fast as I could into someone's backyard and hopped the fence. I heard the van screech on its brakes as I waited behind the fence. A couple of guys got out and started walking towards me, talking to each other quietly. I just started running. Fence over fence, through backyard and backyard until I got to my own. I waited to ensure the coast was clear and went inside. All of the lights were off in the house, so I knew that I wouldn't be seen from the outside. Over the next half an hour or so the van slowly drove up and down my street a few times. I didn't call the police or wake my parents for some reason, although I should have. I never found out what the hell they were doing or whatever they were looking for, and to be honest I don't want to, because it could have been me. I was once on vacation at my cousin's house. I woke up in the middle of the night randomly. For some reason I was drawn to the bedroom window which overlooked the cul-de-sac they lived in. This was a new development and there were a couple houses still under construction. At the end of the road was a flatbed semi. It must have been there for a while as it was used to haul materials for one of the homes being constructed. The bed of the semi had to be close to 20 long and about 4 to 5 off the ground. What happened next is still unexplainable. I saw a child, must have been between 8 to 10 years old. About the age I was at the time. This child was rollerblading in the middle of the road. It must have been 3 a.m. or later and this child was all alone. My eyes followed the child as they picked up speed going straight for the flatbed truck. I was able to see both the child and the truck due to a dim street light. I feel as if the child should have been able to see it as well. Next thing I know I see the kid seemingly disappear underneath the semi. The height of the bed was just short enough that it looked to have hit the kid right in between their shoulders and head, decapitating them. I turned around and went back to sleep. I thought it was a dream. To this day I still have no idea if it was a dream or not. I never talked to any of my family about it and I never heard if anything had happened to a neighborhood child that night. I suppose it'll stay a mystery.